as a young person, to get a piece of land like this, you have to have the right people behind you. And you have to get, unless you're like wildly successful doing something, but it's not like it was back in the day where I don't feel like there's as many opportunities these days for young people.
Hey everyone, today we're going to go check out Cedar Springs Farm. I'm going to go pick up a boar for my herd, old spot, and then we're going to go check out Jake's farm. He's going to give us a tour. Really awesome farm. He's doing everything amazing. He's got cows, pigs, everything regenerative, planted over 10,000 trees in a silvopasture in a high altitude desert. Everything looks great, and looking forward to showing you guys what he's up to.
Yeah, so this creek used to come down the center of the drainage, and we built a dam, and now the water comes around, so it forms this creek, and it actually created an island here. And somewhat intentionally, I don't mow or maintain that island, and we've had an incredible amount of geese and ducks and wildlife pretty much make that island their home, because it's got a tall grass, surrounded by water. It's a very safe environment, especially for waterfowl to nest. So we're in altitude. We've come up from the drainage where most of the runoff and the main ponds are. So we've tapped into a spring that I just kind of gave a channel to so it could run over here. And you can see the spring is full of all kinds of riparian plants and duckweed, watercress. This one here is watercress, and then there's cattails as you go up higher. And then because this is a spring-fed ditch, it doesn't really stop running. It just kind of runs. And because this area was full of trees, mostly junipers and pinyons, the soil is actually pretty decent. It has mycorrhizae and it has some pretty good structure, and so I thought this would be a good place to plant things like walnuts that are a little bit more finicky. Out in the harder clay soil, out in the blazing sun, walnuts really struggle. And I found that the walnuts, and they're just little saplings still now, but they're enjoying the partial shade from these juniper trees. They're enjoying the soil structure and the probably less alkalinity than out in the fields, and they're enjoying this consistent source of water running on the roots. And I planted them high enough that their feet aren't wet. They shouldn't rot out from it, but they also have the ability within one season to tap into that water and drink when they want to, but they're not soaked in it at the root base.
Have you been farming out here?
This is our 4th season here on this farm.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
And you start out with cows and pigs? Is that?
Yeah, we moved here with a herd of cows and pigs, and then transitioned from a pretty standard rotational grazing kind of system to installing earthworks and then beginning to run our animals through the alleys of the earthworks, kind of like a textbook permaculture swaled out field, but the alleys that we graze become defined by the swales. And so we're using the livestock to fertilize the trees, graze down the pastures, and overall just by rotational grazing we're seeing really beautiful soil being built as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of your typical setup with your electric fencing for cow?
Yeah, this is actually a good example. Even though the swale here is very overgrown, it's hard to see the trees. That's a swale. It runs with water. There's trees planted on it. And then on the uphill side of the swale, we have portable electric fencing, which is incredibly easy to take down, put up, move around. And so it's easy to keep the cattle and the pigs moving where we want them. Put them uphill of the trees to fertilize the trees, so the trees actually benefit from the manure runoff and grow from it.
Nice.
And this is an area that was really thick in weeds, so we're hitting it extra hard, seeing if the cows can knock out some of that knapweed, and then in the fall we'll feed the cows grass hay in this area that has seed heads in it. And we've had good luck feeding that kind of hay, and watching the following spring the species that are in their hay actually become dominant in those pastures.
Amazing. So it's just 2 for 1, feeding
Yeah.
the cow and
If we're going to feed the cows anyway, we might as well have them eat hay that's rich in alfalfa seeds, clover seeds, and beneficial grass seeds, because then they'll spread those seeds around, and the seed is in the manure. It comes with fertilizer. Get the spring rains after it's been sitting there all winter, and everything really takes off.
nice.
And ideally will outcompete the knapweed.
Yeah, get it going.
Mm-hmm.
And as more biology establishes,
The
it's
idea
gonna
is every
happen.
year it gets a little better, performs a little better.
Yeah, and comparing to your neighbors, they get the same amount of water. You can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, the neighbors, you know, they're dealing with the same amount of precipitation that we get here. The difference is they aren't necessarily slowing that water down and forcing it to soak into their landscape. The water here, with this heavy clay, especially if it hasn't rained in a while, it'll just run right off the top. And that's why during a heavy rain, the drainages will run really heavily and oftentimes flood, while the pastures themselves can remain parched. Even after a heavy rain, you go out there a couple days later and you kick up dust. And the way to solve that we've come to through, you know, using permaculture and restoration agriculture is you have a series of those swales layered throughout your topography, so that as that water tries to run off, it's continuously stopped and slowed down and forced to really soak in, charge your water table, and then water your perennial trees, your perennial shrubs, so that, you know, as your landscape matures, your trees and your shrubs grow in, then you're also getting shade on the ground and not as much of evaporation. You're also protecting the soil web, just getting all those roots established, and then not to mention, once you have a good canopy established with all these perennials, you're getting evaporative cooling as well. You're pretty much creating a system that's going to self-cool, retain moisture for the maximum amount of time period. After every rain event, retain that moisture for as long as possible without losing it.
And can you talk to a little bit more about how much more water you have now than you did 3 years ago?
Yeah, this area when I moved here had really thick knapweed growth, but really nothing else. And now when you're out here, it's hard to see in this zone because the cows just grazed it, and of course they already ate all their favorite things, which is what I'm going to show you now. But we have lots of red clover, we have alfalfa, we have different kinds of brassicas, and of course we have these beautiful grasses, and the cows love that. And it's mixed in. You can see it's mixed in with the knapweed. I don't ever think we're going to get rid of the knapweed. I don't think getting rid of the knapweed is the answer. I think just making it so that it's more of a polyculture in the pasture instead of one species of a dominant weed, being able to get more grasses and legumes established so that the cows have more forage, and it will self-propel. Once that starts to happen more and more, we'll just see it get better and better. Yeah, we have a little over 20 cows, and mostly beef cows right now, belted Galloways, and we're running a Devon bull to try to increase the growth rate of our livestock while maintaining a really good grass-fed genetics.
And you're pretty much sold out on all your beef.
We're currently sold out on everything.
Nice.
With COVID-19, we found that people are appreciating their local farmers more than ever, and I just hope that as time moves on and the shelves at the grocery stores are well stocked once again from commercial farms, people will continue to support their local farmers and not slide back into the ease of going to the grocery store. Even though that might all come back and be available just as much as it was before, it's such a better, it's so much better for everybody if local farmers are being supported by the local population rather than everybody going to the grocery store and bringing the food in from
Who knows
everywhere.
where. Yeah. And you have an idea, you know, I'm sure you're buying local grains from a farmer, you know, right?
We are, yeah.
So it's like, you know, they're not spraying glyphosate, all these nasty
Right.
chemicals that are trashing our
Exactly.
immune system.
We're lucky in this valley to be able to source locally grown barley and locally sourced grains for the pigs. But what we're really lucky is that most of the year we don't even have to feed grain because we have such a prolific fruit crop in this valley. We can feed our pigs like the late summer and then all through the winter on peaches, apples, pears, plums. You know, if you look at what that field is that I planted the bulk of my trees in, it's a pasture that has been overgrazed for decades. It was overrun with weeds. It's a heavy clay that's had a lot of hoof prints on it and not a lot of water on it. And so that first round of trees I planted when I planted that bulk quantity of trees was, I'm not trying to get really nice peaches out of it. I'm not trying to get really nice apples out of it. I'm not trying to get like baskets of nuts and berries yet. I'm trying to find pioneer species that will thrive in that harsh environment and transform it into a suitable habitat for cultivar species of fruits, nuts, and berries. So many of our cultivar fruit trees originated from the Middle East, you know, where that's like the birth of so many of our cultivar fruit varieties. So in a way, we're not, climate-wise, we're not far off from the origins of a lot of this. We just have to manage our water properly, or else it'll turn into a total desert. I look at it like, all right, if I really focus on building the infrastructure, doing the earthworks, and getting these pioneer species planted, maybe my daughter will be at the point where she can plant a cultivar fruit tree anywhere on this farm she wants to and watch it grow. I don't necessarily know, because I don't know how long of a timetable we're talking about, because we're currently doing the groundwork and the research to find out.
Yeah.
But my hope is that at some point in my life I'll see it at that stage, and if I don't, I think my daughter will, where there's enough shade, the soil is rehabilitated, and there's enough water moving around this land naturally that she can get away with going anywhere. I want to plant a peach tree here and it'll grow. And you know, as far as I know, if you do these earthworks properly and the system runs the way it should, I don't see why that wouldn't be the case. It just will take time. I got started farming in Vermont when I was in high school, and I was a young, confused teenager, like so many are, and I found a wonderful woman her name was Suzanne Lupian. She's still farming over in Vermont, and she was willing to put up with my teenager bullshit, take me under her wing, and teach me pretty much everything I know about animal husbandry and accountability, because they go hand in hand. So going from thinking the world revolved around me and thinking that, you know, basically thinking I was going down this one path, I started farming and started working with animals and started learning from Suzanne and learned it's not all about me, it's about showing up and taking as good care of these animals as I can and working and learning, and it set me on a new course, and ever since then I've worked on farms and done my best to keep that going. As a young person, to get a piece of land like this, you have to have the right people behind you, and you have to get, unless you're like wildly successful doing something, you know, but it's not like it was back in the day, where I don't feel like there's as many opportunities these days for young people to make it like there was. And by the time you go through college, get into debt, go through all those steps, by the time you come out on the other end and have enough money to buy somewhere like this, you know, already a lot of your life has gone by. And so if you want to be young and get into this, you got to work on farms, become educated, learn this stuff inside out, and then make connections, network with people, and get the right people on your side so you can have people invest in this future, not just for you and your farm, but for everybody. Farmed in Vermont. I lived in Hawaii for about 5 years and farmed over there. Had another mentor over there who taught me a lot about about permaculture, about plants, about biodiversity, kind of opened my mind to a lot of different, the woman I worked for in Vermont, it was a beautiful old school train of thought with livestock in New England. And then going to Hawaii was a whole different area of learning around plants and biodiversity and how to propagate and really make an environment beautiful.
And you guys are accepting interns, right?
We do. Yep. Yeah, we take an intern every summer and try to imbue them with the knowledge and the confidence to go do this on their own somewhere. And then in return, they help us on the farm.
And so you dug this swale all the way from over there, the top pond.
Yep.
And then you have, that looks like a plum? I can't tell.
Yeah, this is a Japanese plum.
Nice.
Yep. And everything on this row is pretty healthy. We have a honey locust here. They're battling the weeds, but they're coming out on top of them. So that's a good sign. That they're getting above the weeds. Raspberries are looking pretty good. They're coming up. Also battling the weeds, but because this swale is being flooded, I feel like the trees have gotten a good boost. They've gotten kind of above the weeds.
So this is still part of that top swale.
It is. You can see we've got a Korean pine in here, hanging in there in the desert. It's not a desert plant, but it's surviving.
And those are notoriously hard to grow.
Yep. And I wouldn't say they're really thriving here, but they're doing well enough. These honey locusts are doing great. The honey locust has been a real winner. This is an Antanapka Apple. And
Nice.
These have survived everywhere I've put them.
These are my favorite trees.
They've survived in the driest areas I've put, and they've survived right up on the water. No matter what you throw at them, they seem to take it.
So, yeah, it's my favorite. They come from Siberia, for those that don't know. It's a Zone 3 apple. And like anything from Russia, it's just a little bit tougher. And so this is very appropriate, your farm name for where we're at, right?
Oh yeah, we're in the Cedars, and here's a spring. Cedar Springs Farm.
And that's also your Instagram.
Yep. Yeah, you could say I could have maybe made a more creative name, but I figured I'd use exactly what was right in front of me.
Simple.
Yeah. On it, electric fencing running along the swale, and then the alley itself is being grazed by cattle. So that's textbook, restoration agriculture as far as I understand, which is to have that kind of layer.
Yeah, it looks amazing, man.
Animals in the middle.
Mark Shepard would be happy.
I'm trying. I'm trying to interpret his work, which is designed for the Midwest, where they get rainfall, and translate it so that it's compatible with the high desert. And so I've had to make changes, and I've had to, a lot of it's been a learning experience, but the model itself, I think, is really applicable. But there are definitely things that work in Wisconsin that don't work here.
How come you went with the Belted Galloways? Is it just a breed you're comfortable with? Did you do research on it?
Yeah, they're medium-sized. The Belted Galloway is a medium-sized cow, and they perform really well on a 100% grass-fed diet. They are good mothers, easy calvers, all around a hardy and delicious animal. So,
And how long does it take to get to market with one?
I like to wait a solid 24 months or more with them. You can butcher them younger, but I think at about 24 months you start to get some really nice flavor and marbling. Let them go even longer, you get even more flavor. I'm a big fan of letting them go longer and developing more. And
Do they get tougher, the meat, or?
not in
How
the
do you
first
find-
few years, in my opinion. If you let them go past 5 years, maybe you start to encounter some of that. But
And would you make that into ground beef?
I still would make prime cuts out of it because the flavor is so incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, and there are some chefs who do appreciate and utilize an older cow, and the prime cuts out of an older cow. It's quite a delicacy.
And I love the taste. How do you stop it from becoming too gamey? I've noticed that in grass-fed beef.
In my opinion, it's a lot about the breed. So a Belted Galloway is a grass-fed animal. It's never really been commercialized. I've never known of a commercial Belted Galloway herd. and so their genetics are still really catered to grazing and 100% pasture and hay, grass-fed diet. If you eat an Angus, which if you think about it, most commercial beef is Angus or some kind of Angus cross, in the US at least. And the Angus has become dependent on corn for marbling. If you don't finish your Angus cattle on corn and grain, you end up with a gamey, tough carcass, in my opinion. It's genetics. The Angus was bred to finish fast on corn, grow fast on corn, finish fast on corn, and be tender and be marbled. Whereas these animals are slower growing and perform really well on pasture. And in my opinion, you don't have to grain them to achieve marbling, and you don't have to grain them to achieve good flavor.
Gotcha. And are they pretty profitable?
Yeah, they're at this point the most profitable endeavor on this farm.
Wow.
Yeah, they take some maintenance, and I have to move them around and keep them fed all winter, but when we process animals, grass-fed beef is top dollar, especially a heritage breed like this that's got really good flavor, really good marbling. These animals dress out top dollar.
Nice. And how many pounds would you get out of a carcass?
We just got one back from the processor that was under 2 years old. I think it was 18 months, which is younger than I like to, but I made an exception. I had a date to have an animal processed, and that was the one that was ready to go in. At 18 months, we had a 600-pound hanging weight, which I was pretty happy with. Yeah, and when I sell the animals retail, when we get an animal back from the processor and I bring it to market and sell retail cuts, I mean, you make exponentially more money.
Wow.
Which is wonderful for us because it helps us to buy hay for the winter and
make a living.
Yeah, it helps us survive the winter.
Farming is tough,
Yeah.
I think farmers deserve much more.
Yeah,
especially this type of farming. You're adding carbon to the soil. You're making a place so abundant.
Yeah, and we're prioritizing overall health of everything instead of prioritizing the bottom line. If you were to actually pay me, even if I sold you a really fancy ribeye and you were like, man, that's expensive. If you were to be paying me by the hour for it, I'd still, it would seem different then.
Yeah.
It's
and it's so easy, but we're talking about 2 years. It's so easy to think about in your head. Oh, this is how much I make per cow. I'll have 20 cows, but the reality is, 2 years it takes from that calf.
It's a 2-year investment.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yeah. So it's great potential, and it takes skill. That's why.
Well, it takes skill to get them from being born, like those little calves that were just born in the spring, to being a yearling, to then being butcher weight, and to get them there healthy and with weight on them and ready to go on pasture. You got to keep them moving, keep the rotations spiffy. You don't want to leave them too long in any one area.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but if you want to keep them really putting the weight on, you got to keep them on fresh grass and keep them moving through it and put that weight on them.
Perfect. So guys, this is fresh cow patties, and this is exactly what you're looking for in a biologically active operation. You got dung beetles sending all that manure into the ground where it's composting in place. And this is how nature built all those fertile soils in the Midwest. It's a really good sign. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the tour at Jake's farm. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.